Hi, my name is Nir Eyal, author of Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. And I'd like to share with you why I think becoming indistractable is a big idea for 2021. You know, there is no area of our life that is not affected by this skill of the century, our ability to control our attention, to decide how we want to spend our time, because that is ultimately how we spend our life. So let me share with you a few techniques that you can use right now to help you become indistractable. Starting with understanding, what is distraction really? I mean, we talk about time management, we talk about all these skills that we need to manage distraction, but really, what does that word even mean? The best place to understand what distraction is to understand what distraction is not. That the opposite of distraction is not focus per se, but the opposite of distraction is traction. So traction, by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do, things that you do with intent, things that help move you closer to your values and become the person you want to become. Now, the opposite of traction is distraction. Distraction is any action that moves you further away from what you plan to do, anything that is not aligned with your values, anything that is moving you away from what you plan to do, and those are acts of distraction. Now, this is very important for two reasons. Number one, anything can be a distraction. How many times have you sat at your desk and said, okay, I'm definitely going to work on that big project. Nothing's going to get in my way. I'm not going to get distracted. Here I go. I'm not going to procrastinate. But first, let me just check email for a few minutes, right? So even though you are working on something quote unquote productive, something worky, it's still not what you plan to do. So therefore, by definition, it is still a distraction. And I would argue it's the most dangerous form of distraction because you don't even realize that it's distracting you, pushing you further and further away from what you said it is you wanted to do. So we have traction on one side, we have distraction on the other side. Anything can become a distraction. Anything can be traction. So don't listen to these people who tell you that social media is bad, that checking YouTube videos is somehow rotting your brain. No, any of this stuff is fine as long as you do it on your schedule. You can actually turn distraction into traction by planning time for it, by making time for traction, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But first, let's talk about what leads us towards either traction or distraction. We have what we call external triggers and internal triggers. External triggers are all these things in our outside environment, the pings, dings, and rings that can lead towards distraction. Those are kind of the usual suspects, and we'll get back to what to do about them in just a minute. But the number one source of distraction are these internal triggers, these uncomfortable emotional states that can lead us towards distraction. So let's talk about that first, because this is the leading cause of why we get distracted in the first place. You see, one principle that we have to understand is that time management is pain management. If you somehow find yourself procrastinating from time to time, if you get distracted, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not somehow broken. It's simply that you haven't learned the skills to deal with these uncomfortable emotional states. That all procrastination, all distraction is simply a desire to escape discomfort. So once we realize that time management is pain management, here are a few things we can do about it. Number one, we can simply note the sensation that psychologists tell us by simply writing down what it is that we're experiencing right now, getting curious about that sensation, and then surfing the urge, realizing that these uncomfortable emotional states, be they boredom, anxiety, stress, fatigue, whatever the case might be, in order to control this impulse to try and escape that uncomfortable sensation with some kind of distraction, we can focus on it for just a few seconds to surf the urge, because emotions, these uncomfortable emotional states, they're like waves. They crest and then they subside. So we can surf them just like a surfer on a surfboard. The next thing we can do after we master these internal triggers is to start making time for traction. You see, you cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Let me say that again. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it is distracting you from. So if you don't schedule your day, somebody's going to schedule it for you. How can we call something a distraction unless we know what it distracted you from? You have to plan that time, starting with time boxing your calendar, planning out in advance how you want to spend your time. To make time for traction, what you want to do is to plan the time, not the output. Do not run your life with a to-do list. That is a terrible strategy to try and become more productive. To-do lists are registers of output, but you can't have output without the input. What's the input? The input is just two things: your time and your attention. So plan the time and attention, not the output. I promise you, the output, you will get things done as long as you make time for them. Don't just keep a big long list on your to-do list. Nope, that's not going to get you where you want to go. You want to make sure you plan that time on your calendar. Make time for traction. Also, what you want to do is to spend less time communicating and more time concentrating. You see, so many of us are constantly going from one thing to the next, one ping or ding, pulling us from one direction to the other, that we don't have time to actually think. If you want a leg up over the competition, if you want to be better at your job than anybody else, make time to think. You know why? Because nobody else is doing it. Make that time in your calendar, in your schedule for that 20, 30, 45 minutes in your day to actually spend time thinking, planning, so that you make sure you're not running real fast in the wrong direction, that you're actually doing what it is that you want to do according to your values. The next thing that we want to do on our path to becoming indistractable is to hack back the external triggers. These external triggers are all the pings, dings, and rings in our outside environment that can lead us towards distraction. And there's a few things we can do to start hacking back, starting with asking ourselves, is this trigger serving me, or am I serving it? By asking ourselves, and really consciously thinking about all these notifications that are on our phones, all of the emails, the WhatsApp messages, the Slack notifications, are they serving us or are we serving them? We can make sure that we can hack back the external triggers that are not serving us, that are not aligned with our values. And finally, we can leave those distracting devices outside of meetings, whether it's in our personal life, whether it's in a business context. If we are going to be fully present with people, we need to be there both in body and mind. Now, another thing we can do to hack back these external triggers is to think about these external triggers in our physical environment as well. What if many of us are working from home right now and we find ourselves getting distracted by our kids, our roommates, our spouses? What do we do then? Well, there are techniques that we can use to actually interrupt the interruption, all kinds of tools we can use to make a physical environment that tells people, oh, we can't be interrupted right now. And there's a lot more information on my blog, nirandfar.com, about that as well. Now, the last step to becoming indistractable is about preventing distraction with pacts. Now, there's a lot more in the book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, that deals with how do we make sure that we can create an indistractable workplace? How do we raise indistractable kids? And how do we have indistractable relationships? So, of course, there's much more in the book that we can cover in this short video, so I hope you'll check that out. But just to leave you with the very last step to becoming indistractable, we can make these pacts in our life, these pre-commitments, to ensure that as a last resort, as a fail-safe, as the firewall against distraction, we make these pacts with ourselves, with other people, or ironically enough, with technology to prevent us from getting distracted. What might this look like? Well, there are all kinds of technologies out there. Most of them are absolutely free that you can use, I use them every single day, that prevent you from going and doing things online that could distract you. So for example, when I do my writing every day, so I'm an author, I write, it's very easy for me to get distracted, but I don't allow myself to get distracted because I make a pre-commitment, a pact with this piece of software on my desktop that blocks out all the potentially distracting websites, email, Google, the news, so that when I say I'm going to focus on a particular project, that's exactly what I do with my time. But be careful with these techniques, because if you make these promises, these pacts prematurely, before you take the other 4 steps, before you master the internal triggers, before you make time for traction, before you hack back the external triggers, this technique will fail. This is part of a concert of ideas. We've got to use all 4 of these techniques together in order to become indistractable. So thank you so much for your attention. I hope that you use your attention to become indistractable and master the skill of the century. To learn more about me, please visit my website, nirandfar.com, and check out the book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life.